Welcome to the Tuesday, May 4th, 2019 regular meeting of the Planning Commission. Please stand for a moment of silence and reflection. Thank you. It is our practice to open each meeting with the opportunity for the public to come forward and speak on any item that is not on the agenda for the day. If there's anything you want to bring to our attention or to that of the staff, please come forward. Okay, seeing no one. Excuse me. We'll move. We do not have a committee report. Start with old business. There's an item I want to move forward on the agenda, the Avon Ferry Corridor Study. Is there anyone here who came to speak on that item, Avon Ferry Corridor Study? Okay, since there is no one, there is going to be some property owner discussion related to that. Staff has recommended that we defer that case until June 11th. So, in agreement with those at the table, we're going to defer that item, Avon Ferry Corridor Study, to June 11th. Okay? We don't. Okay, so then that takes us to rezoning Z119. Mr. Mabel, good morning.
Good morning. All right, so this is the fourth, I believe, appearance of this item, so I will be brief. Request is for about 2.5 acres from R4 to R10. Did receive a positive vote from the Northwest CAC, started its life in committee of the whole. So last time there was quite a bit of discussion between the applicant and a neighboring property owner about the right-of-way improvements. And there has been a new condition added to the case, so I'm going to basically skip to that. This is just a refresher. I'll pause for a moment on the overview map. So the site is in red, and when we speak about the Pinnacle Apartments, those are the apartments to the north. So the conditions that you've seen before remain the same. A cap on density to 7 units per acre, some prohibitions on uses, some language about buffering, and then open space and greenway easement. The new condition basically speaks to the timing of the right-of-way improvement, so it requires that all required right-of-way improvement, save for some small pieces that the applicant anticipates requesting a right-of-way closure, to all be developed at once and during the first phase of development. So we had some discussion before about potentially having more than one phase of a development and never doing the second one and never having to do the right-of-way improvements. So this condition basically removes that possibility. So again, consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. I believe I mentioned in the staff report that there were some minor technical issues related to the wording of some of the labeling on the map and some of the shapes. I did receive a revised version yesterday that at first glance appears to correct all those things. I still need to check with my transportation planning colleagues to make sure. But regardless, they were all minor and insubstantial and technical from my point of view. So approval today could move forward, and those would be incorporated. They did not change the intent of the exhibit, and I can go over that in more detail if there are questions. But I think the applicant and the property owner, the neighbor, are here, so I'm going to leave it at that. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Mabel?
Yes, I guess. So are you satisfied with the new condition? Is the staff satisfied with the new condition that it accomplishes, and the wording is what we need for the right-of-way?
I'm satisfied of that. So that one question about the hypothetical we had raised about not having to do the right-of-way initially and potentially in perpetuity has been removed. There are still the possibility for technical reasons, so there's the stream crossing, other things that the development services engineering review might ask or decide to waive that I don't think a zoning condition is ever going to approach resolving. But at the very least, the conditions that the city is going to require would be required all at once and right up front. And transportation staff, if you have a different answer, welcome to come up. But, okay, great.
So I just wanted to be clear that that the applicant was going to build the road on Mid Lakes Drive all the way to the end, and then turn onto Stony Crest, and that is what is offered here. Is that right?
Right. So all of that right of way is included. So there is. I'll go to somewhere I have. So there is, the exhibit exempts some right of way, basically this piece internal to the site, and then this sort of vestigial remaining piece that had been dedicated before. But the Stony Crest piece, so all the right of way, that's this curve coming from the pinnacle down, is included in the condition. So whatever would be required of them at the time of site plan would apply to all of the streets that would provide access to the apartments. Yeah. Sure.
One point of clarification, you said build, and the condition as it's worded doesn't say build. It could be a fee in lieu, which is a normal practice that if, for instance, I'm going to draw on here, that this part of the property is developed, they will build the part that's adjacent to the development, and they'll pay fees in lieu for all of those improvements, dedicate any right-of-way and any slope easements necessary, and have to prove that it is feasible to do so. And then those easements and right-of-way being in place, if this were to develop later, then they would build and be reimbursed for the improvements that were kind of effectively in the middle. What we don't want to happen is build a public street to the woods that's a dead end, and then leave it there potentially for years where it might crumble, where it might be used for purposes that we wouldn't, because it's a very invisible situation, we won't generally require those improvements to be built unless we know that there's something that it's going to connect to imminently. So often there's fees in lieu for those sorts of construction. And then whenever a property owner builds improvements that are off-site that they may be required to or may be asked to do, then there's a procedure for them to be reimbursed for those.
Even better, I think, right?
The only downside is the fees in lieu are not necessarily directly in line with construction costs, which has interesting implications for both the development side and on the city's budgeting side. But it's a system we have, and it works pretty well, I think.
Thanks.
Other questions? Okay, entertain a motion.
So I'll move that we approve Z119. It's consistent with the comp plan. I think it is in the public interest to approve it.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Okay, let's move along. Rezoning Z419. This case has been presented to us before, but I understand we have some new conditions.
That's correct. Good morning. The case Z-4-19 is a request to rezone a site on Freedom Drive south of New Bern Avenue from residential 6 and commercial mixed use with a 3-story height to industrial mixed use with a 3-story height and conditions. As you can see, currently largely undeveloped, surrounded by mostly industrial uses, but having a school to the north and a manufactured housing neighborhood to the south. And so the last time you saw this, there was a question about a condition that controlled the entitlement on the site, which might potentially trigger a TIA, traffic impact analysis, at the time of rezoning. That has since been resolved by revision to the wording of that condition. There also have been additional conditions offered and modifications to conditions offered, which address some of the questions that were raised last time about potential impacts of industrial uses in the form of noise and light. So the commercial vehicle repair use has been prohibited entirely from the site, and then a setback has been applied on the northern part of the site from the school property for other vehicle repair uses and the car wash use. There's also an additional setback offered for the southern part of the site adjacent to the manufactured home community for vehicle repair uses and car wash uses, so long as that community remains in place. And it is an existing nonconformity, so if it was removed, could not be reestablished. Additionally, let's see, I believe those were the only changes. Oh, excuse me. There is one other change for light fixtures. Pole-mounted light fixtures on the southern part of the property would have a height limit lower than the UDO standard. So in light of those changes, a couple of the policies related to industrial and commercial uses have changed from inconsistent to consistent. Those would be mitigating industrial land use impacts and managing commercial development impacts, as well as noise and light impacts. So the case remains consistent with the comprehensive plan, inconsistent with the future land use map, which is community mixed use, and moderate density residential, which do not envision industrial uses. And so if this request is approved by the City Council, it would automatically cause the future land use map to be changed, and the most appropriate designation would be business and commercial services. And at this time, there are no technical issues with the case.
Okay, thank you. Do I have questions for the staff? Mr. Geary?
What's the size of the buffer on the southern?
Sure. Depends on what you're talking about. So there's a buffer of 100 feet for loading docks, or they have to be facing away from the property to the south. The buffer for vehicle service other than commercial vehicle service, which is prohibited, but for the major and minor, so that's kind of like your typical auto repair shop or a Jiffy Lube, those have a buffer of 300 feet from the residential community to the south. There's also a requirement for a fence, planting of trees in that area, and there's also a height limit in that area.
That buffer is 100 feet or more?
For most uses, the buffer would be, I believe, 50 feet.
Yeah.
But then for the vehicle service, it's 300 feet, and then there's a requirement for landscaping and a fence.
I forgot to, you mentioned a cemetery in there, and what?
That actually was on the site of the previous zoning case, so it's actually a little bit off of this site,
Okay.
kind of in this area. So it's not on the current zoning request site.
All right, good. Never mind.
Other questions for Mr. Anagnost? Okay, again, we have heard this case before, so we will not be hearing from the applicant or having any public comment. So in the lieu of any further questions,
Do we need to recommend a designation for the comp plan amendment?
If you look in the staff report, I think the first proposed recommendation includes that language about the future land use map amendment.
I'm not. Until I...
someone has that handy, we'll entertain a motion. Staff is very accommodating, giving us language assistance here.
Wrote it down somewhere here. Let me see if I can find it. So I'll move that we approve the rezoning. It's consistent with the relevant policies of the comprehensive plan, and though inconsistent with the future land use map, approval is reasonable and in the public interest, and I think that is the case. Is that sufficient?
If you keep reading the next sentence, if approved.
All right. If approved, the future land use map will be amended as to the subject parcel only from community mixed use and moderate density residential to business and commercial services. Change in conditions taken into account and amending the zoning ordinance to meet the development needs of the community as described below in the case.
In the staff report, yeah.
Very well stated, Mr. Geary. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second, Mr. Mann. Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Thank you. Okay. Let's move along to Z719. Mr. Belk, good morning.
Good morning. This case was first presented at your last meeting. This is a site at 2003 Rock Quarry Road, R4 to NX3, parking limited with conditions. The South CAC voted last evening, 19-6, against the proposal. Your deadline is July 22nd. The current zoning R4, this is a commercial area, generally speaking, and there are some multifamily and single family near the site, as you see from this map, the large church property across the way. One note on this proposal for the rezoning, the applicant has stated to the CAC that this would be a freestanding restaurant. A couple of views from the site that you've seen, and again, the conditions, the applicant has conditioned the building height, prohibited the townhouse and apartment building types, and a number of other uses. The contrast between the existing and the proposed zoning, the retail, of course, the NX has the retail entitlement. Future land use is moderate density residential, no urban form impact. However, it does border the mixed use center, as you see. This proposal is inconsistent with the future land use map of the moderate density residential, as you saw. However, we find it consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, and the consistent and inconsistent policies are listed. In this case, with the inconsistency in the future land use map, approval of this rezoning would result in a comprehensive plan amendment to change this designation of the subject parcel, and that would change from the moderate density residential to neighborhood mixed use. There are no outstanding issues on this case, and again, your deadline is July 22nd. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. I have one. If you could go back to the inconsistent there. I know you addressed this in the staff report, but if you give kind of a quick overview, particularly related to the transitions and the buffering requirements, tell us about any concerns there.
Okay, these, the land use 5.4 through 5.6 policies were addressed in the staff report. There was a single comment on those. First of all, the density transitions with the adjacency of residential, typically an office type use is seen as a good transition between residential and commercial. This, of course, being cited as a standalone commercial use. The transitional and buffer zone districts, of course, there would be a neighborhood transition required on the south border. Because of that sharp contrast or move from commercial to residential, a suggestion for a couple of things to ease that transition a bit. One would be perhaps an enhanced buffer. The other suggestion was to consider lighting, full cutoff lighting fixtures, and in the design of the site, having any loading areas or trash receptacles, those kinds of things, facing away from the residential area. And the inconsistency on policy 8.1, housing variety, was cited because the applicant has conditioned out townhomes and apartments, which of course are integral to many types of neighborhood mixed-use developments.
So your thoughts there about things that might be done have not actually been offered as conditions?
They were not offered as
But they-
conditions. Of course, the building height was, and there is a slope, significant slope on the east side of the tract, which may actually result in a larger than required buffer, but no additional conditions have been offered at this time.
Thank you. Other questions?
Not a
Ms. Jeffrey?
question, Mr. Chair, but given that the CAC voted against this in such great numbers, I'm curious, first of all, what the tenor of those thoughts were, and also if there are people here who are here to speak. I know that we had people speak last time, but given there seems to be something that's upset people, I'd like to hear from folks who might be here.
We can open it up, a
Okay.
vote. Let's hear from Mr. Belk first. if
Thank you.
Yeah, just the main concern from the CAC folks last evening was traffic and pedestrian safety.
Okay, we'll need a motion and a vote to open it up for,
I'd like to make a motion to give each side 5 minutes for expressing either support or opposition to this case.
Second.
we have a motion and a second to open it up, 5 minutes each. All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? Hear from the applicant first. You got 5 minutes, and plus anyone who wants to support your effort as part of that 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Neil Ghosh. I'm an attorney with the Morningstar Law Group at 421 Fayetteville Street here in Raleigh. I wanted to address the CAC meeting last night. So we had our CAC meeting last month, and it was not well attended. There weren't even 19 people at that meeting. And so when we came to the meeting last night, which I have to commend Don for putting in long hours, he was there too. I'm sure you all appreciate that as much as I do. But last night, there were a lot more people at the CAC meeting, which I was surprised about, but also very pleased with, because up until last night, we have had limited input from our neighbors. Now that we have some more input, we are definitely willing to add conditions. I note that you all must act on this case by July 22nd. So we would request a deferral, and we're happy to add conditions. We've already been talking about some, specifically some of the ones that Don mentioned, which relate to the type of buffer, placement for service areas, and our lighting. Hours of operation was another thing that came up at the CAC meeting last night, which we think we can add a condition for that. So we're hoping to get a deferral today so that we could add some conditions and come back to you again with a better case, and we're happy to finally have some input from our neighbors. If there are any questions that you all have, I'm happy to answer them, but we recognize the case could be improved, and we intend to improve it if you'll let us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions for the applicant? David?
Did any type of runoff issues come up because of the site slope back towards the residential?
No, and
Given that it's going to be standalone, there could be a lot of parking, impervious surface type.
I guess this is good. Okay, so there is residential zoning here,
Right.
and they are all owned by one property owner. And as far as I know, the residents here were not at the meeting last night. This is also residentially zoned, and these people also were not at the meeting, as far as I'm aware. The slope on this property is kind of back in this area. There's about a 9% slope, which going back towards this area. So we suspect that 9% slope probably will get worse as we develop the site. But in general, we didn't hear any concerns from folks in this area about existing runoff problems or flooding problems, and we anticipate that probably our stormwater control measures will go kind of in this area. So that's another one of the conditions we were looking at.
Something to consider as you go back through this.
Yep.
Other questions for the applicant?
I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about why you eliminated the residential uses?
Yeah, and we were asked that question at the CAC meeting last month, and the primary reason we did that was just to be very clear about what we're trying to do here. So this area here, while it is shown as moderate density residential on the future land use map, all of it is commercial, commercial zoning, and there are commercial uses out there. we wanted to be very clear that we're not intending on putting residential at this location. Now, I wouldn't disagree that residential might be appropriate here, but it's not what we intend to do, and we didn't want to convey that to anyone and mislead you. We are intending on doing a commercial use here. In fact, the applicant of this rezoning operates the Little Caesars that's in line in this location, and their lease is coming up. Their intent is to relocate to a permanent location here. Now, this site looks large on the map, but because of the slopes and things, it doesn't actually have a lot of developable area. They're looking at like a 2,200 square foot footprint, and there would be parking. You know, that's basically all you can fit on that site because this back half is mostly unusable for vertical development. So, you know, it's not going to be a large commercial use, and at any rate, we're not intending on putting a residential use there.
Other questions? Okay, anyone here who wishes to speak in opposition to this case, please come forward. Seeing no one, okay. Then we have an interest from the applicant to defer this case so they can work on conditions.
Do we want to see if there's anybody here in opposition? I didn't know. Did you?
I just asked that.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
There's nobody else in favor as well. I think there's some more time left.
I'm sorry.
Moved up. Are you wanting to speak?
I'm sorry. But please, it's my mistake. Please come forward. Introduce yourself and address, please.
James Brown Jr., Brown Realty Company, 814 Newbern Avenue, representing the owner, Mr. Maury Carlton. We also a deacon at the church directly across the street there that's indicated as neighborhood mixed use. The property has been vacant for several years and been for sale. People have expressed interest in it, and when they find out it's zone residential, they have backed away from it. We do have this buyer here, and I mean, it's, to be clear, it's self-serving for me. We have a buyer here that's interested in putting a Little Caesars, and it's subject to it being rezoned. I was at the CAC meeting last night as well, and the concern was traffic, and I mean, at some point the property is going to be developed at some intensity, and maybe or maybe not increase the traffic. But I would like to get your support for the case. I would express my thanks to you to serve on the Planning Commission. I served on it several years ago, and understand where you sit and understand the decisions that may be difficult for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anyone else wishing to speak in support of this case? Okay, I'll offer again, just in case I overlooked anyone wishing to speak in opposition. Okay, I think we've now heard from the public. So we have before us an interesting case. The applicant has offered to do further conditions and asked to defer the case to a specific date, or do you know how much time you and Mr. Belk want to come up with a time?
I think if you deferred it to your next meeting, we would have to have conditions in by Friday, and I think we can probably accomplish that. So the next meeting would be fine with us.
So it'll be May 28th.
When is the next CAC meeting?
The next CAC meeting will be next month. They meet the second Monday of each month.
Okay. Will you go back to that meeting with new conditions? Do you want to?
We could. I don't actually know how to do that.
Well,
suppose we can just get on the agenda.
Yeah. I don't think there's any particular process for it, but you could.
Yeah. Would you anticipate getting another vote at CAC?
Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we're open to going back to CAC.
Been done.
It would be nice to see a little bit more community support.
Sure. Agreed. Sure.
I'd be interested in the hours of the Little Caesars.
So the current one at this location is, I mean, basically they open at 11 a.m. and they close it by 10 p.m. I mean, they have some variability during the week versus the weekend, but those are the outside hours that I'm aware of, and they would anticipate the same at this location.
Dr. Novak?
And, I mean, you might expect pizza's not really a AM thing, so.
Directly to the
Not
north,
for you, maybe.
Yeah, well, fair enough.
directly to the north of this site, what's located there?
Yeah,
It's a gas station.
there's, all of this is commercial. There's a gas station. I think there's car sales?
Family Dollar.
I'm sorry, there's a Family Dollar right here. And at this corner, there's a gas station.
Well, there's the gas station, then a Family Dollar, then this site.
Yes, yes.
So you've heard some suggestions from us and apparently from the public as well.
Sure.
And the suggestion that maybe it's your call if you want to go back to the CAC. We can hold it for 2 weeks or we can hold it for longer.
1 second. I mean, if you all would like us to go in front of the CAC, we're happy to do that. You can hold it for
Okay.
a month. I'm assuming we will be able to get on the agenda next month, but I don't know that right now.
May we defer this to a date uncertain?
It'd be better if you deferred it to a date certain, so the next
Okay.
CAC meeting is June 10th, and that would put your next meeting at the day after on the 11th.
Yeah, that
Okay.
makes sense.
Then let us, if it's okay, you're acceptable to
that
this, defer this to June 11th.
Sounds fine.
Okay.
Yes.
You need a vote, or?
We do not,
Okay.
since that is the applicant's request. Making my own notes here. Okay, then, Mr. Ghosh, thank you very much. We appreciate it, and thank you for working with the community. It's important that that happen. Yes, sir. Okay, Mr. Belk, let's talk again. Rezoning Z9.
Z9. This is a rezoning request, again, going from residential to neighborhood mixed use. This has received a positive vote from the Southeast CAC. Your deadline is July 22nd. This is a split zoning of this property, or a split rezoning, I should add. The lower portion of the property, not part of this case, is presently zoned CX3, and you can see that it is surrounded on 3 sides by other mixed-use designations. This is near a commercial area on Pool Road near the 87 interchange, the Walnut Creek Shopping Center there. Just south of the site was not too long ago, earlier this year, Z2319, which was the rezoning of the former Cokesbury Methodist Church to an OX use. And this, again, a closer view of the site. The large vacant tract to the east is owned by NCDOT. There's a City of Raleigh fire station near the intersection with Samuel Street. Another aerial view. This is a view. There is a townhome development to the west. So looking north, this proposal, when developed, would result in the extension of Samuel Street through to Winslow Ridge Drive, which would give connectivity to Sunnybrook. A few photos looking from the site. The vacant church site, presently Samuel Street, dead ends there. A number of conditions that the applicant has proposed, limiting it to multi-unit living, townhomes only, with a maximum number of 50 on the site. I should note that the applicant has expressed to the CAC their intentions of ultimately developing the CX portion of the property as townhomes as well. For this case, you can see the difference. The entitlement under the existing zoning for 35 residential units that has been conditioned to a ceiling of 50 in this case, and other non-residential uses have been conditioned out of this proposal. Neighborhood mixed use is the future land use here. There's no urban form implications. This proposal is consistent overall with the flume and with the plan overall. And by the way, this is the second time that you've heard this case. The previous meeting, the case was deferred to enable some responses or some wording in the conditions to be tightened up, and that has been done. So there are no outstanding issues on this case.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Belk? Mr. Geary?
I was just interested in there's the stream corridor through this site. Is there any easement offered or needed to the nearest greenway, which is less than a mile away? Is that part of the case
There's a stream buffer to the north side. That would be, more than likely, that's going to be part of the tree conservation area. The applicant, I think, is here to address that specifically, but my understanding is that pretty much the development will be well away from that stream and buffer.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll ask the applicant if I can do that.
Yeah, we will not have an applicant presentation, but you can certainly question the applicant if you have a question for the applicant.
I'm just a big fan of greenways, and that stream corridor leads eventually to the Walnut Creek Greenway, so getting there, can you help get there? It's a question.
Do we have someone from the applicant?
I know it goes through DOT property, so it's, is there a way to offer an easement? Do you need to offer an easement to do that?
Good morning, Pam Porter, TMTLA Associates, 5011 South Park Drive in Durham. To touch on your question about the greenway, during our review, staff did not ask for an easement.
Right.
I think that may be something that would be explored at site plan. We haven't had that conversation with staff about an easement, so we're not going to propose one because we haven't been asked for one. The intent of the stream buffer is to be tree conservation. It's required the first 20 feet or the outermost 20 feet as primary, so that is the intent of the stream buffer, less where we have to cross to make the connection to Samuel Street.
Right. So I guess would ask, this gets handled at site plan then?
Well, it only gets handled at site plan if there's a mapped greenway corridor on the greenway plan. I'm not.
Is there not?
I don't believe so.
I don't believe there is. I think that if there was, it would have come up during the review that we would have to dedicate an easement for the greenway.
Yeah. Well, it may be the difficulty of getting across the DOT property.
Their property's a lot bigger than ours.
I see that. Okay, well, you weren't asked, so I'll drop it.
I was going to give this presentation last time, but it's very quick.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just for my clarity. Did we hear from the applicant last time?
I think
you did.
You
yeah,
did, so
I
you would need a
briefly.
vote to reopen.
Yeah,
Right.
right. You're right. I just didn't remember. I remember we talked about it, but I didn't remember the actual presentation. So if we want to hear this, we'll need a vote to do so.
I'll move the. How much time do you need?
It's very brief, I promise
3
you.
minutes? Give the applicant 3 minutes.
Sure.
Thrill us with this case.
Do we have a second? Second. All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
Go for it.
I'll keep this brief because you heard from me last time. Before we get into this, I do want to say that we did submit some revised conditions to reword them to staff, and they were accepted. So we're all set with that. Okay. So let me just go to this slide here. I just want to make sure that this is clarified because at the last meeting, I think there might have been some confusion. So our site is the R6 and the CX3 zoned site. We're only rezoning the R6 part, and the rest of it we're leaving as CX3. I just wanted to make sure that was clear because the way the conditions were worded before, it was confusing. So between cleaning those up and then this map, I think it helps to illustrate what we're doing. And then this is the graphic we showed at the neighborhood meeting and both CAC meetings, just to illustrate to the neighbors that we do have to connect Samuel Street through the site. The right-of-way is already, if not all the way there, it's mostly there. We've got 2 pods of residential on either side. We have to cross the stream, but that stream provides a buffer between our site and the Winslow Ridge townhomes, because that was something that did come up at the neighborhood meeting that we had. And then this is just, it's just for illustrative purposes only, but just to show you the type of townhome product that's going to be constructed. Starlight Homes is excited to be in this part of Raleigh, and thank you for your consideration. I told you I'd be brief. That was all I have, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have for me.
Thank you very much. Other questions for the applicant? Okay, and we did have our public comment last time. Thank you for helping me remember all these things. Were you offering something, Ms. Hoffman?
I was just saying, did you vote to get both sides just to make sure anybody was?
He asked, the vote was to give the applicant 3 minutes.
Are we supposed to give there is no other side here, is there?
It's a fair question.
Can we
Is there
ask-
anyone
yeah.
here, just raise your hand if you came to speak in opposition to this case? Okay, we're seeing no one, but thank you for, again, appreciate that you keep us on point here. So, back to the table. We have a case, CEC positive vote, consistent across the board.
I make a motion to recommend approval as it provides more housing in the city of Raleigh, and it is in the public interest. And it is consistent with the comp plan and the future land use map. Is that correct? Yes. And there was a positive CAC vote.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Novak. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you. Okey-doke. Let's move along to new business. Z1019. And again, this one is without a CAC vote.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, these two have no CAC vote. Could we, unless there's someone here to speak, perhaps just go ahead and defer these?
I had a question about this one first, Ms. Ellis. And this, the CAC is not going to meet until June 24th, is that correct?
Correct.
So are we hearing this because of a time issue or?
Yes.
Okay. Do we need, would you tell me if we need to take some action today?
Sure. I had a discussion with the applicant earlier about timing that would allow him to receive a CAC vote, and I believe he would like to ask to have this case deferred to a date certain. You may.
So the South Central CAC is meeting on June 24th, which is a Monday. Planning Commission is meeting that next day, June 25th. So we would ask for this to be deferred until June 25th. That CAC sometimes votes at the first meeting, just given the kind of low attendance at that CAC. So sometimes that happens. If it doesn't, that still gives us time to request an extension from council before they go on summer break. That would still, give us time to then come back after that. So June 25th.
Thank you. That's excellent. Very helpful. So if it's okay, then we will defer this item till June 25th, and hopefully we will have a CAC vote at that time. Thank you. This next item, again, is one where there is no CAC vote, and it's a general use case.
That's correct.
So I would certainly be inclined to want to hear the public's thinking on this one. But is there anyone here today who came to speak about Grove Avenue, Z1119? Okay, so there's no public today. So if we were to defer this, do you have a suggestion about a possible date?
I do. May 28th. The applicant has been to the West CAC, and they are scheduled for a vote on May 21st. So May 28th, the case will have had a vote and can come back before you.
Okay, agree. We will defer this one to May 28th. Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Ellis.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, we are moving into a new territory. Mr. Crane.
That's right. So thank you. This is likely something new on your agenda that you haven't seen before, but we've talked about it in the past. So you might remember a text change that was recently processed that would recognize how zoning conditions can be changed. You also might remember that towards the end of last year, we learned of some recent case law in the state that provided guidance for us for changing zoning conditions. And the basis behind that case law is that because the zoning map is not changing, therefore it's not a map amendment and it's not a rezoning. So what we have done is incorporated into our code a process by which zoning conditions can be modified through the text change process. Now, truth be told, the process that was created looks very similar to the rezoning process in that there is additional outreach that typically doesn't happen with a generic text change. So there is direct mailed notice to property owners within a certain radius. There's a requirement for a neighborhood meeting. So there is a few additional touch points prior to any public meeting on the request. So Mark will walk through the changes to the conditions. We admit that this is obviously the first time we've done this, so we might be a bit awkward in our conversation, but the tenor behind the discussion might feel very much like a rezoning. But truth be told, the actual request is just to modify certain conditions that have been previously approved.
Yeah, I would just add to what Travis said at the end, that these go to city council to get approval for, so you're looking at certain conditions. I don't know about this one, if it's all the conditions or not, but I guess staff will present which conditions you're looking at. But they go to city council to get authorization for a text amendment, just like any other text amendment.
So before we move into the specifics of the case, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask another question about the process.
Okay.
So I didn't see anything, as I heard you say, there's a mail that will go out to the neighbors for the public meeting and a neighborhood meeting will be required. I didn't see anything about the CAC voting on this since it is like a zoning case.
Right, so that's a great question and something that we've talked about internally. Obviously, the zoning code doesn't recognize the CACs, but we all know it's been a long practice to have rezoning requests appear before the CAC. I'll just say a savvy applicant would likely want to visit a CAC to identify changes to zoning conditions. But again, not a requirement, but that's something that if the Planning Commission is interested in, can ask the applicant to visit the CAC.
Thank you. Mr. Holland, good morning.
Good morning. Okay, this is what we're titling is TCZ -1-19 is for the property at 5001 Spring Forest Road. This would amend the conditions that are associated with the zoning case Z4708, which again I would note is was approved before the current UDO was adopted. This was approved as part of the 2009 ordinance, and this is relative to 607 ZC 639 and Ordinance 523 ZC 721, which is part of the UDO remapping. There are 19 zoning conditions that are currently governing the two associated properties with this rezoning. These conditions generally regulate use, lighting, landscaping, density, building materials, buffers, building height, transit amenities, vehicular access, hours of operation, and trip generation amounts. The petitioner has requested to modify the conditions for the 11.2 acre portion of this property, which is zone CX3 PK, conditional use, and is located on the north side of the Spring Forest Road. The associated property with this, which is the larger pieces on Lewisburg Road, was involved in the rezoning, has been developed into apartments, and that property is not part of this request. Again, this request would be relative to the 11.2 acre property. Let's see. Sorry. It would affect the 11.2 acre property. The following previously prohibited uses would be removed from the list of prohibited uses within this use permit conditional use. These are uses that are no longer permitted in the CX zoning district per the current UDO, and they have been removed. These would include landfill, airfield, manufacturing, cattlery, riding stable, industrial uses, and above ground storage of flammable materials. The following uses were not previously specified. These as prohibited, these would be included here. That is a heliport, commercial parking lot, remote parking lot, bars and nightclubs, vehicle sales and rental, detention centers, automotive repair, car washes, and outdoor sports entertainment. The restriction, the current restriction on lighting would also be removed. There's a transition yard that must be a type 2 or type 3 yard. This requirement, this will require a 20-foot or 50-foot landscape area at the property line adjacent to the residential. The condition that requires a buffer along Lewisburg Road would be removed as it relates to the larger portion of this that was in part of the original rezoning. The subject property for this particular text change would be that portion that does not front Lewisburg Road. The condition that limits the residential density would be removed. The property to the north on the associated site has 300 dwelling units on it, and the property in question is currently undeveloped. This would remove that limitation on the maximum number of units. There's a condition that limits the use of vinyl siding for residential uses. This would be removed and would be relocated within another condition that is in the proposed conditions that you have. The condition that requires a 100-foot landscape buffer to the additional or to the residential properties to the north and west would be removed. The portion of the condition that regulates fencing would be retained. The condition that requires a minimum square footage of the residential dwellings would also be removed. The condition that requires cross access between the rezoned property and the properties to the north would be removed. The condition that limits development based on a trip budget would be removed. A new condition would be added that requires 80% of the units to be occupied by at least one person 55 years of age and older. That is the end of my presentation. Staff is available for any questions, and I'll also state that the applicant has a presentation that they would like to provide.
Okay, do we have questions for Mr. Holland?
Just one, I guess. So initially this was zoned with a limit of 302 units, and now 300 have been built. So what's the available entitlement of number of units if all these conditions are removed? What can be built on 11 acres? How many residential units? Do you know?
As far as the number, I do not have the number in front of me, but I know that there is a proposal to build more residential units on this property. Right. I think upwards, I don't know what the applicant can better verify or better address that question, is what they're proposing to build. But it's my understanding that these would be either be apartments or townhomes, or maybe a combination of the two.
So normally we do an analysis for a map amendment. Yeah. We have not done the similar type of build-out analysis for this text amendment. I presume the applicant could probably, based on the product type they're planning to build, give you an idea of 11 acres. You know, if this is 2 to 3 story construction with surface parking, it would be difficult to breach 20 units an acre, so probably 200 and some change might be a reasonable number to think about, but we'll see what the applicant says.
Other questions for staff on this? We can come back to those. Let's hear from the applicant. Be interested. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group, 421 Fayetteville Street, Suite 530. I wanted to start this morning by talking a little bit about our petition, because I understand that you haven't seen a copy of the petition that we submitted for the text change. And here's where we really address the city's policies and how this project can help satisfy those policies. And since you don't have it, I'd love to pass this around. Can we send that? Those are some of our answers to the questions about those policies. In particular, I wanted to talk about the policies that I think you see in the staff report, talking about the need for housing, especially the need for affordable housing in Raleigh. And that was in our 2009 comprehensive plan. And to update you on the situation there, in 2009, in the Raleigh-Cary metropolitan statistical area, nearly 75% of homes for sale were affordable. And these are sale homes, and I'll translate that in a minute. But for sale residences were affordable to the median income households. Since that time, that same statistic has fallen from near 75% to around 61%. So things have gotten less affordable in the for sale market, obviously making the rental market more important these days. And a different statistic from a different source that compares the sale and rental markets says that between 2006 and 2016, the for sale housing prices increased 16% relative to household income in Wake County. Over the same time period, rental residence costs increased 35%. So they're rising even faster than the for sale units, increasing the need from the time that even our policies were written back in 2009. So although you do see those policies in your staff report, I just wanted to kind of highlight how even more important those are today. In addition, I know that staff called out the long-term affordability policy. I understand that this is the contract purchaser of this property is DHIC Inc. Many of you may be familiar with their long-term work in the Triangle area, and they've let me know that the types of financing they use absolutely require a covenant to be recorded that would require the property to be affordable for a minimum of 30 years. So that goal would be satisfied as well here. In addition, there was a focus on some of the infill policies, and as you may be aware, certainly under the more narrow definition within the UDO, this large 11-acre site near a major intersection really doesn't meet the UDO infill standards. However, it's entirely understandable that the comprehensive plan may use a looser definition of that. So if we do look at this site as an infill, sitting there between, there to the northeast, we've got a 4-story market rate rental housing project, and then over to the west, we've got the single-family homes. What would be permitted here would be a 3-story residential project. And with a senior housing restriction, providing a transition in a couple of ways. One, through the lower height compared to the apartments to the north, and also having lower impacts. One of the concerns we heard was traffic, and the senior housing restriction would lower the trip generation for this site compared to the apartments to the north. So those are some of the ways that the city's policies are being addressed through this proposed change in condition. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the meetings that we have had at the CAC and at our neighborhood meeting, and the ways in which we've been responsive to the comments that we've heard there. In particular, one of the initial concerns we heard was that there would be a street connection required up to Old Elizabeth Road or Holly Drive to the north. And there had been an existing condition that would be prohibited. We included that prohibition in our conditions based on the neighbor feedback. It wasn't initially there, and we did add it in to prohibit that connection to satisfy those neighbors. Additionally, some of the concerns related to both crime and traffic that may be generated by this site. And it's our hope that our senior housing restriction, which also came later and was not part of our initial proposal, that would also help to address those concerns.
Did you say crime?
Crime. That was a concern that we heard. And so I would like to, I don't think I need most of my slides here, but if any of you are not familiar with DHIC, these are some of the products that they develop. I just wanted you to have a look. That they've been working in the Triangle for a long time. They do continue to own the properties that they develop, and this is their intent for this site as well. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Have questions for the applicant?
Well, so do you know the answer to the question I asked? CX3 zoning on 11 acres would entitle you to how many units?
Sure. As a form-based district, it doesn't necessarily have a hard
Right, I know
cap,
it's-
and as far as how many would fit, I think we've seen a possibility of something around 200, maybe a little bit more than that. But I know that the applicant isn't contemplating anything more than about 180.
108?
180.
At 180.
Oh, yeah.
And is that a part of your, have you offered that
It's
as
not a condition. No.
Okay.
Mr. Novak?
I noticed the removal of the condition requiring a 100-foot landscape buffer that was originally part of this. And I'm assuming you're trying to substitute in the current UDO transition area. Is that what you're looking for there?
That's correct. We did limit it to 2 of the options that are available there.
Would we be consider just leaving that 100-foot since that's what was presented earlier to the
Right.
neighborhoods?
So we heard a concern about the buffer last Thursday at the CAC, and since then have attempted to look into what can happen on the site as far as the buffer is concerned. We haven't had time to complete design to be able to say what we can offer on that front.
I had a question. Oh, Ms. Jeffries, go ahead.
So you also removed the vinyl siding restriction from the condition?
It was moved to a different condition.
Okay,
It's still
so
there.
it is still there?
Yes.
All right, just wanted to make sure, because that's, at some point, was important to folks in the area.
We've kept that.
And I also had a question about the lighting. The condition on lighting was removed. But is that addressed elsewhere in a different condition?
It's not addressed in a condition. That was removed because it is now fairly tightly controlled under the UDO itself.
And this was not a question that came up in the neighborhood about lighting?
No, I don't recall any discussion of,
Okay.
of lighting. The UDO, it has similar type restrictions. They're actually very difficult to read with what was in the conditions
Okay.
to see what would apply.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
All right, so you've gone to one CAC meeting, is that right? And
We've been to 3.
you've been to 3 CAC meetings, okay.
Did you ask for a vote?
We had a vote last week. Oh, that was not part of the report, was it? We had a vote last week. The vote was 2 in favor, 38 opposed, and 3 abstentions.
How many in favor?
2,
And how many opposed?
38.
Okay. Okay.
So crime and traffic were the reasons that there were so many people in opposition?
I can't say that those were the primary topics at the meeting where the vote was taken. Those were things we heard over time at the various meetings. Certainly, traffic was still a concern. Buffers came up. I think those were the most recent concerns.
Other questions? Okay, let's hear from the public. We can certainly come back to questions as we need to. Hear from the public. Anyone here? We have 4 minutes and change in favor of this proposal, in favor of this application. Please come forward. Anyone? Yeah, I have a question for you later. Anyone in opposition to this? Please come forward. Nope. Okay. I did have a question, Mr. Myers, when you have a moment. It's regarding the, I'm sure this was a neighborhood concern, but the Old Elizabeth Road and Holly Drive not wanting to be connected to this site. In terms of our connectivity expectations and block perimeter expectations, is this something at site plan that would be revisited as a site plan issue where we would encourage that? Or if the condition says we're not going to do it, we're not going to do it?
Exactly, yeah. The current conditions say we're not allowed to do it, and the applicant is intending to keep that condition.
Okay.
And so that would block any sort of access, pedestrian, vehicle, otherwise, between this county subdivision and the property.
Okay, thank you.
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
Do we know what the block perimeter is, if it's currently?
I can measure that and tell you in a minute. It's very, very long. I will say that you can't even see it on this map, but these 2 points of access to this subdivision are the only 2 points of access to the subdivision, and it goes all the way to Fox and 540 before you find a public right-of-way. There's about 130 homes in there. There is a right-of-way stub, I think, on this street that could, in the future, be connected to that subdivision, but otherwise it has no other access.
It's vast.
One other. Is that
Microphone.
Probably at least a couple miles.
between the subject property and one of the houses?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Is that a driveway that connects, or goes through the subject property that's connecting to the second house to the west?
You know, I hadn't noticed that. That would be something I could look at an aerial photo a little bit more, and maybe something the applicant can speak to if it's some sort of easement or encroachment or something. But let me measure the block perimeter and get you an actual number.
Okay. While we were measuring block perimeter, do we have any other questions?
I had another question. I saw that the provision for bus stop was taken out as a condition that was in there previously, and I know I'm not wording it correctly. Can you speak to that?
Sure. That is also something that's covered in the UDO now. It would require a dedication.
Okay. Okay. Other questions on this? While we're waiting for the block perimeter, we did get some letters in support of this via email. Since this is a sort of a new process, this TCZ, and again, not required that there be a CAC review, nor for anything, but they've made several contacts with the CAC and the neighbors. Mr. Myers, you have something?
The current block perimeter is about 15,500 feet, and that goes up to Bivens Drive and Sinclair Drive and Fox Road. Those two neighborhood streets roughly parallel 540 on the inside of 540. They're perhaps about up here if you were to be able to zoom out to where that street then comes around and kind of connects back to Fox, which is approximately here. So you can kind of project out what that would look like. I don't think we have a greater a map that zooms out any further than this. Yeah, those are all images from there. So the standard for CX would be normally 3,000 for like a CX3, which I think is what our RX5 would also be. It would be even a little bit smaller than that.
Mm-hmm. And the vehicular access to this site is off Spring Forest and no other?
I believe that there is a cross-access between the RX5 property and the CX property, and the subject property, not the CX property, the subject property.
That was removed, or maybe I'm confused.
I think it's
There is cross-access to the to the apartment property as well. The condition that was removed related very specifically to the northern end of that property.
Oh, okay.
So it simply just didn't apply to this site.
So you do anticipate bringing traffic to this site through the other site?
I'm not sure that design is completed, but the easement is in place. We will speak to it.
Okay.
Can the applicant tell us, you all developed the property to the south of this one, is that correct? Is it a similar type of development, just for context?
Where is this property?
No, to the north.
Oh, to the north, I'm sorry.
Oh, no,
Sorry.
that's a separate developer.
Okay, thank you.
Is the applicant willing to look into adding conditions about buffering that would be more satisfactory, since that seemed to be one of the issues expressed in the voting?
They're willing to continue design to look at buffers.
Are you willing to look at adding a condition is the question?
Yes, and
okay.
To look at to see what we can add on that
okay. All right.
aspect.
Okay. Well, we have an opportunity. We can take a vote on this today. We can defer it, and if you would like time to look at any additional conditions, it's your call, and revisit this. Do you have a preference?
We prefer to have the vote today.
Have the vote today, okay. That's fine. Well, we have a case before us, TCZ 119. in this case, we would ask to still be in the public interest. What are our standards for this, Catherine?
So for a text amendment, you're thinking whether or not it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and whether it's reasonable in the public interest.
Okay. Okay. Consistent with the comprehensive plan and reasonable in the public interest. Mr. Holland, I don't know, we didn't really talk about consistency with the comprehensive plan, I don't think. There were some language in here.
Right, so this is part of the awkwardness we discussed at the beginning
Right.
of this
Right.
discussion. Typically with a text amendment, we identify policies that would be supported as a result of the text change. So at the very beginning of the certified recommendation and staff report, you see a host of policies that are listed. Now, through discussion, if the Planning Commission believes there are additional policies that are not being satisfied or fulfilled as a result of this request, you can identify those as well. But moving forward, we can start to take a look at creating that consistency for you, because that will become the basis for your consistency statement on these.
I would like to observe at least the policies that are listed are very important ones. Zoning for housing, removing housing barriers, long-term affordability. Those certainly strike me as important issues, and we've talked at this table a long time about the affordability issue. So that's something that I think should be in front of our minds as we discuss this.
So
Mr.
staff
Gary.
identified no inconsistent policies, is that right? Did you identify any inconsistent policies?
No, again, what staff has done to date is identify policies that would be furthered as a result of this text change.
Does that mean that you didn't look to see whether some would not be further?
That's correct. We did not.
You know, Lord, I've been carrying on about affordable housing here for quite a while, and I want to support this project. That CAC vote is causing me to think maybe I ought to drive out there and look at this site. I'd like to think about this case for 2 weeks and give the applicant a chance to maybe think about conditions they might offer.
Ms. Jeffries, you were about to say something?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm on the same page as Mr. Gary. I think we need a little time, since this is the first time we're seeing one of these kinds of cases. I would like a little bit more information from staff about, whether it's consistent with the comp plan and what the inconsistent policies are, if there are any. It's a new process for us, and it feels like a zoning case, and we don't have some of the things that support our way of making evaluations of a zoning case, even though it's not a zoning case, but it acts like a zoning case. So I'd like 2 more weeks to chew on this, and also to give the applicant some opportunity to come back, since buffer is a concern. I also really don't like the block perimeter situation here. So that's where I stand on this at the moment.
Thank you. Mr. Novak.
A question as far as the infill compatibility, that from the conditions that now exist, they do not come into play with regard to that infill compatibility, since it was originally, when it was rezoned, that was part of the rezoning conditions? In other words, when it was rezoned originally,
right,
and added that condition, isn't that required to retain its compatibility, that if it's removed, then it's no longer compatible? Does that not really matter?
Okay, so
That's fine.
the difference between what's in the they call a 100-foot landscape buffer, so that's a no-build zone with just landscaping in it. The case is removing that condition would be bound by the UDO requirements, which is a 50-foot no-build zone, and then a 50-foot area where height is controlled. But given the product they're building, it probably would be under that height anyway. So, and that has to have one of a couple of types of transitional yards in it, but it's not as large a buffer.
Right.
But it is the buffer that the UDO has determined is supposed to work for most sites, mixed-use sites that abut residential. So that's the buffer that's enforced throughout the city on conditions like that. And I think the question here is, are there circumstances that merit a larger buffer than what the code would generally require? I will make a thing on the block perimeter. People know that block perimeter is my favorite standard in the UDO. However, running a street through this site will do very little to meaningfully improve the connectivity of this oversized block, and in fact will not change that big block perimeter measurement at all, because all it's going to do is create a loop into another. But the whole neighborhood is a giant dead end, so you create another access point. It's just still another access point to a giant dead end. The actual walking distance around the area, you can think of block perimeter as what is the walking distance around an area without trespassing. It's still very large. So I'm not sure that this would be a very meaningful enhancement to connectivity in this location, just because it's basically just creating a loop condition where there's already an entrance into the neighborhood not very far away. Okay.
I'm gonna show my ignorance here. A couple of weeks ago, we had a case at Crabtree Valley where a similar problem with thoroughfare access was presented, but the applicant offered pedestrian connections. Is there a way to, I'm not sure what you're connecting to, is there a way to add pedestrian connections that allow movement within this site without getting in a car?
Well, are you asking if there's a way to provide pedestrian connections into the neighborhood behind the site?
Yeah,
onto that street?
Not having been out there, I don't know where the pedestrian connection would go, but hopefully it goes to a sidewalk somewhere that goes to a store or a restaurant or a shopping center.
I don't think there's any sidewalks out there, are there?
There is some sidewalk in the vicinity. There's plans to build some of the city capital project on Lewisburg. I'll note that there could be, to answer your question, and it's my understanding that this neighborhood does not want any pedestrian connection, or at least that's what they've been communicating. If there were a pedestrian connection through the site roughly along that access, this is a grocery store. It would help facilitate more right in there. I don't remember if it's a Food Lion or another brand, but that's a grocery store. And if there's transit in the area, the transit's most likely to be on Lewisburg Road. So I'm going to clear that and start over. But taking this path around is pretty circuitous. Shortcutting it there is going to make it quicker and easier. And since there's no sidewalks in this neighborhood, presumably a little bit more accessible to be able to make that connection. But it's my understanding that there's opposition to that connection, or at least there has been historically, and there's been I guess a notion that we should avoid changing anything there. So
okay.
I'm not stating a value statement as much as saying what I understand to be the facts are.
Understand. Thank you.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay, so we've had a suggestion that we wait a couple of weeks. Is that the sentiment of the group? Then we will defer this.
Has it been your past practice when the applicant has not asked for a continuance that you guys, or a deferral, that you guys vote on it?
Sometimes when we want to allow ourselves more time for review, we do defer a case.
But we do need to vote.
Yeah, I think in the past you might have voted when it wasn't the applicant's request.
Thank you. No, thank you. Then thank you. Cool. Excellent. In that case, we will treat this as a motion.
So a motion to defer for 2 weeks?
Okay. And do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second to defer for 2 weeks. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. So, okay, 5-1 to defer for 2 weeks. Okay. Okay, let us move along to TC1B, omnibus list. We do not see Keegan McDonald.
TC 1B-18, which is a text amendment related to the omnibus use-related clarifications. This text change would permit breweries, wineries, cideries, distilleries as a principal use in the downtown mixed-use district under certain conditions. It would modify requirements for remote parking facilities and would clarify restrictions related to produce stands. Just to give you a little bit of history, the council received an initial presentation on these changes back in September 2018. This was the omnibus list. The omnibus was broken down into 4 sections: process use, regulations, and typographical errors. This is the use portion of that. On May 13, 2019, Growth and Natural Resources Committee recommended all within the errors category be moved to the City Council, and in May of this year, the City Council authorized staff to prepare the draft ordinance. As far as this text change goes, the terms distillery and cidery would be added under the light industrial use category. This would permit breweries, wineries, cideries, and distilleries in the downtown mixed-use district with the conditions that there would be no distribution of products off-site and that there would be no outdoor storage of production materials. For the remote parking, currently the UDO states that remote parking facilities are only permitted in the same contiguous zoning district as the principal use that is serving. This proposed change would allow remote parking in to be located within the district that permits the principal use it is serving. The use standards for this is a remote off-site parking facility would be located within the specified distance of the principal use served, and those distances vary among the zoning districts in which they're allowed. The remote off-site parking facility would be located completely within the zoning district that permits that permits the use that the parking is serving. And a type 1A or 2A transitional protective yard must be established along any side of the property abutting a residential use. This would also include in the R1, R2, R4, R6, R10, or RX district, a fee cannot be charged. For produce stands, there would be a language that would modify the definition of that and would clarify that a produce stand could not be utilized as a permanent building. Pretty simple text change. I'm available for any comments or questions.
Okay, thank you. I have questions for Mr. Holland. Yes, sir.
How would this have related to the remote parking to the Montfort case?
That's a great question. So the Montfort rezoning, you might remember, was a rezoning to R10. And so what the code says today is you have to be in the exact same zoning district to have remote parking. This text change would modify that to say you don't have to be in the exact same zoning district, but what I'll call the receiving property that's going to receive the cars has to allow the use that's being parked for, right? So the challenge that we have seen has been mostly related to parking for office or retail or mixed use in and around downtown, where our zoning map is not as contiguous maybe around the edges. So properties that are trying to park where the use is located in the DX zoning district into another mixed-use zoning district that's not allowed today. So we've seen some conflict there. This would rectify that. So back to your initial question, if this text change were approved, parking could be allowed in another R10 on another R10 property within the specified distance from Montfort Hall. Now, a special use permit would be required because remote parking requires a special use permit in the residential zoning districts.
But currently, they couldn't put the remote parking in like the DX or IX district, you know, even if those are much more intense districts.
Right.
You know,
and that was my case. So
and
it would be, if it's a higher intensity, that's okay. It can be a low. Okay. That's right.
Yeah, but I mean, the key thing is that the uses are permitted in both districts. So it's going to be much more flexible. Before, obviously, a rezoning is a big thing to go through if all you're trying to do is you have a property that maybe spans 2 zoning districts. You know, you could think of NX and OX next to each other, and you're building an office building which is permitted in both districts, but the parking lot is going to be partially in the OX, and that's not allowed because now it's remote parking and it's in another district. You know, this would resolve that, but it doesn't allow parking to intrude. So, for example, if I'm a commercial use, and we saw this with recently, or not recently, but in the not too distant past with the dentist office that was expanding its parking lot into a residential zone. They had to rezone. They would still have to rezone because the dentist office isn't a permitted use in the residential zone. You know, they couldn't. But if it were something that was permitted, you know, like residential, then you would be able to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions on this?
No.
Okay, then let's have a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve this text change.
Second.
Motion to approve?
Sorry.
Excuse me.
Anything about consistency with the comp plan, reasonable public interest?
Do we, I don't know how to, we don't have anything that supports it as consistent with the comp plan, do we? Or is there?
I think there's some comp plan guidance on the first page.
Well, there are listed policies that
Okay.
are identified.
All right. So since there are policies that is consistent with in the comprehensive plan, it is in the public interest, and it resolves several issues with the current UDO text.
Okay, we have a motion, and do we have a second?
Second.
Second. Okay, motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Okay, this is actually good, Ms. Jeffries, because when Ira was here, Ira always had to correct my motions. So it's nice that we have someone here who's keeping an eye on us.
Yes.
Ira says, now you need to say. So thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Okay, TCZ 2, another new condition case.
Okay, this is TCZ-2-19. This is for the property at 4501 Durley Road. This would amend the conditions associated with the zoning case Z-40-01 that was approved in Ordinance 2001 13 CZ 499 and Ordinance 151 TC 357 as part of the adoption of the UDO. There are 7 conditions that govern the property which generally regulate stormwater, the requirement to combine the properties, right-of-way reimbursement requirement for a natural protective yard and setback on Durley Road, the cross-access to the adjacent property to the north and west, and lighting and a requirement for a landscaping buffer to the adjacent properties. The petitioner is requesting to remove 5 of these 7 conditions. The first condition and the third condition would be removed, and these relate to stormwater management controls and the reimbursement for right-of-way. These are current standards of the UDO would no longer require these. Condition number 4 is a 30-foot natural protective yard, 50-foot building setback maintained on Durley Road. This is one of those that's being requested to be removed, and here you can see that the removal of this condition is inconsistent with policy LU 5.1, reinforcing the urban pattern. Condition number 5, also to be removed, would be prior to redevelopment and offer of cross-access to the adjacent property to the north and west would be provided. The comp plan policies promote connection and connectivity and walkable development. But as you may be aware with this particular property, the property to the north and the west is part of the quarry site. So there have residential zoning districts, but there's no actual subdivisions on the property, and the property to the west is currently undeveloped. but it is connected, however, to that property to the north, which is the rock quarry. Condition number 7 is a 20-foot natural protective yard shall be provided along the south property line adjacent to the R4 lots. Again, this is to be removed. The removal of this condition is inconsistent with policy LU 5.6, which addresses buffering requirements. These are the conditions that will remain, and they'll be renumbered accordingly. These conditions are prior to redevelopment of the property. The parcels will be recombined into a single parcel, and site lighting, including wall pack fixtures, will be a full cutoff design. The pole-mounted lighting will be limited to 18 feet in height. Staff is available for any questions on these.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. Holland? Not at this time. Let's invite the applicant to come forward, please. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning to everyone. I'm Don Washington, and my property address is 4501 Durley Road, 27612. I've owned the property for 22 years. I rezoned it to R6 when the city took frontage for the road widening of Durley Road. And I rezoned it myself at that time so I could understand the impact of the road on the property. And these conditions were set at that time. When they granted my change from R4 to R6, the council agreed that the future use of the property would possibly be neighborhood commercial or higher, denser residential. And so along with these conditions, they agreed with my talking point on that. They put a turn lane in front of the property for the nursing home across the street. Also, when they engineered the road, they put a commercial driveway in the center of my property so that I have 3 egress points on the property. I felt the conditions were put in place because of the uncertainty of where the greenway was going to run at that time, particularly the egress in and out of the property. And John Phelps, supervisor of surveyors, helped me with the wording on this and so on. And so I've decided to make this text change request because I think it's reasonable and appropriate, and that the greenway issue has been resolved and it's now going to run beside the property, and that the gravel pit has settled the court case with the city. It's not going anywhere for 30 years. And they're putting all their slag from the operation of the quarry beside the property. So I'd like to have the prohibitive restrictions removed. And as to the buffering and so on, I think if you look at the property itself, I don't know if you can see it on Google, but there's already a natural division between the R4 and the R6. And I don't think 20 feet is required. It's all towering pine trees and mature bush, and it's a natural buffer. My neighbors aren't opposed at all. And I just like the conditions removed, and ultimately I'd like to pave the way for me selling the property so I can retire.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Washington.
Thank you.
I have questions for the applicant. I'm looking back at these conditions. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Novak.
The buffering requirements, the natural protective area, 50-foot setback along Raleigh, which ones are causing the difficulty in
Mostly the egress issue. And was your question about the 50-foot setback?
That would, originally when this was done, it was to be consistent with the rest of the what was going on through the corridor, if I saw this correctly.
Right. Well, it's the only property left on Durley almost that's not developed, and there's a variety of depths and so on. And I thought that if it is developed or higher density residential goes in there, that I thought that would be addressed topically, with the design and so on. So, and also that I had a lovely protective buffer that the city didn't replace when they widened the road. So they planted a couple of trees in the power lines for me, and so that never got corrected when the road was widening. So that's why I brought that point up.
Okay, looking at this is condition 4, and that's about the 30-foot natural protective yard, 50-foot setback. And the inconsistency here is that properties within 500 feet of the site have at least 40-foot setbacks. And if we take this out, then it's only going to be a 10-foot setback. So that's the issue. So yes. You'd be happier with the 10-foot than.
I would be happy. Listen, to be honest, it's the egress issue. It'd be road to nowhere. The gravel pit is not going anywhere. That's my number one. And I'll certainly take your counsel on those other conditions.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant?
Well, you said you have towering pines between yourself and the R4 zoning.
Yeah.
Are there 20 feet wide worth of towering pines?
No, well, my carport right now is about less than 10 feet from the property line. And they're old, mature pine trees. And the homes with my neighbors, their homes are 100 feet from the property line. They're large lots on Rockwood. And I just thought that normal R6 conditions would be appropriate for the property.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I am also troubled a bit by this 30-foot natural protective yard being removed. It says removal of this condition would revert to the UDO requirements of a 10-foot setback from the road. This represents a significant change to the character of the area. And so that's the one that catches me. And I'm not sure if staff has any advice about making that less of a significant change to the character of the area, so that a condition that could be crafted that provides more of what you need, but less of a significant change to the character of the area.
Right. There's nothing there now. There's some pine trees, and again, I'm new at this, and so.
And that's why I mentioned staff. So I didn't know if they had any thoughts since they made that assessment.
The staff has been great and very helpful with me on this whole process. I'd like to point that out.
Well, thank you. Mr. Holland, any? Oh, Mr. Bowers?
Oh, go ahead,
Mark. Well, for the protective yard, I don't know that that's something, that condition doesn't necessarily have to be removed. If it is the will, direction of the Planning Commission to keep that requirement in there, that's certainly upon, at their discretion, or that can be reduced in some manner. But that would be at the Planning Commission's discretion.
And so I'm trying to understand the hardship that causes the applicant for, if we were to suggest that it stay. I mean, I guess I'm not clear on how this affects the applicant and how what it is that staff is trying to convey to us about the significant change in character.
Well, I think what we're trying to convey is that, this is small property. So 30 feet into the property is taking a chunk out of the property that's got to remain as buffer yard. But because there's buffer yards on properties adjacent to it, if you don't have the condition, then, you know, I don't know exactly what can fit on here, but let's say you could put a small subdivision on it. You know, if you ran a street, cul-de-sac, or hammerhead into the property, that might be the side yard. House could be pretty close to Durley Road. That would look very different than everything else, but would also, you know, so I think, you know, the removal of conditions certainly probably ups the yield of the property in some meaningful amount, but it would potentially result in development that doesn't maintain the tree line character. So that's kind of the decision in front of you.
Does Durley, the road, does it have a recommended frontage? It doesn't, or have a suburban, a parkway frontage? Apparently not, because it's going to revert to 10 feet.
I do not. Hold on a second. You call up the urban form. Not showing up here. Where is it? Where's Raleigh urban form? What should be under Raleigh after street?
Mr. Gary, what was your question again?
Yeah, I think there's no designation.
No designation of Durley of a recommended frontage.
Okay.
I have a question. Is the buffer you were talking about maintaining the character, is that something that's is that because of the quarry use?
That would be my guess, and just reading what was approved in the past, it was because of that, the adjacent quarry use.
Right. Because, you know, in general, the code does not enforce buffers on residential zoning districts, and all up and down Durley Road is residential zoning. So,
but apparently there's a prevailing character?
well, I mean, there's a prevailing character, you know, yeah.
Okay. So let us hear from the public on this. We have 6 more minutes, and plus for anyone who wishes to speak in support of this application. Okay. Anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Okay, back to the table then.
So I'm about to move that we deny this text change, but I would suggest to the applicant that perhaps he might want to think about changing that frontage from a 50-foot buffer to something more than 10, and that would make this a lot more acceptable. Without that, I'd vote no.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
I don't know what the amount is. It's probably less than 50-50 is pretty good size setback, and on the size lot, you know, it would affect what you can build in there. But just riding down the road, I think the consistency of appearance within that area would be, I would try to maintain that overall look. It could be 25 feet, 30 feet, I don't know what. But since we had already had a rezoning on this previously, and that's what it was agreed to and everything else, I tend to err on the side of maintaining that as opposed to changing it.
Now, Mr. Washington acknowledged that he would, you know, welcome guidance. So we can certainly vote, or we can offer him suggestions for consideration that he might want to entertain at his choice, his discretion.
I don't have a number, but 30 sounds like it might be reasonable. 20 might be reasonable. I think 10 is, staff is suggesting that 10 is inappropriate, so let's start upward from there.
Yeah, so
it's up to him. I mean, he needs to.
Yeah. Mr. Washington, I think you're getting the sense of the group that we'd like on this particular standard about the 30-foot natural protective yard. We'd like something more than the 10 feet that it would revert to.
Would 20 be satisfactory?
We don't know what that right answer is, but if you would
I don't.
consider proposing, we would like you to consider thinking about that. And if
Okay.
you want to offer, I don't know if we can offer, the condition has to go to staff for review, so we,
If that's the intent, it would be appropriate to defer the case for 2 weeks and allow the applicant to come back.
yeah, great. Because, again, these particular cases are new to us too, so
Right, I
we're with
understand that.
you.
Yeah, I
We're with you.
understand that.
But that's the issue that seems to trouble us. So we would like you to consider looking at that and discuss with staff and see if there is a number that's comfortable.
Happy to do that, and again, and the thrust, the text changes was new for everyone, and I'm reasonable, and I want it to be appropriate.
Great.
So.
Well, we thank you for that. We're going to defer this 2 weeks.
Okay.
And that'll give you a chance to have those conversations, and your choice as to how you approach it, and we will then
Look forward to clearing it up, and thanks for your consideration.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Would it be appropriate to ask if there was some way to show us what that would look like in the context? It's a little hard to tell from these
Right.
maps what's
We could-
10 feet, what's
we-
50 feet.
I think
We could work a graphic up.
Thank you very much.
Staff is going to say that 20 feet, say, is now consistent with LU 5.1 or still inconsistent.
Well, that's
If they
why-
say it's consistent, you'll probably be in good shape here, but showing it would be very
Yeah,
helpful.
so staff can show us, and again, that's where staff can work with the applicant to find some degree of comfort what that number is.
Great.
And-
Thank you for working with me on
Oh,
that.
no,
Happy
yeah.
to
Great. Well, we appreciate that.
discuss
your
that
willingness to do that.
and get it right. So.
We will defer, and again, we'll ask staff to help us visually see what that looks like. So we'll defer this for 2 weeks to May 28th.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Washington.
Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right, now we have TC 219. This is the design adjustments story. Mr. Holland.
So this one is pretty heavily legal, so.
Yeah,
I
I've
think
got you right here in my notes.
Mr. Holland's going to present, but we're here for any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We're counting on that.
Okay, this is TC-2-19. This deals with the design adjustments. When the UDO was adopted in 2013, there was a new regulations put in place for regarding blocks, lots, access, and streets included in Article 8. These regulations applied to subdivisions and site plans, and there was a new process put in place for design adjustments with the adoption of the UDO, and the intent of this was to allow, in certain circumstances, modification to the standards that are in Article 8. Chapter, as you see here on the screen, Chapter 8 includes standards for right-of-way, includes standards for new existing streets and streetscapes, and block perimeter standards for the, a term you've heard this morning, for connectivity. The process of design adjustment allowed applicants to modify certain standards at the staff level. As you see here on the screen, example of this would be to reduce the streetscape width due to constraints on adjoining properties. Staff would review the findings as they are listed, identified in the UDO, and would review and possibly approve the design adjustment. Those findings, as found in the UDO, deal with intent. They deal with the if it conforms to the comprehensive plan and adopted city plans, and it does not increase congestion. Its approved adjustment does not create additional maintenance on the city, and has been designed and certified by a professional engineer, and would address stormwater collection and conveyance, and not adversely impact stormwater collection. As you can see, these are largely subjective. These standards are largely subjective, and we want to make these more objective. The staff cannot consider subjective criteria in its approval process, and the staff no longer accepts these applications for design adjustments. They now go to the BOA, which is their only mechanism for hearing these. They are reviewed as a variance, and in which case the applicant has to prove some sort of hardship. This text change would create a process for the Board of Adjustment to formally review these design adjustments, and it would maintain the existing standards that you saw earlier to be reviewed in a quasi-judicial hearing. The key changes that you will see will be the replacement of the term Development Services Director with Board of Adjustment. It would create allowance for BOA to review design adjustments. This would be the first step in a longer effort to adopt language, present to you, and have language adopted for a more long-term solution. This is really more of a quick fix to address the ones that we already have, the design adjustments we already have in the queue. The staff is analyzing a longer-term solution, and this may involve alteration of standards and the administrative review of objective standards. Staff is available for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hoffman, you want to add anything at this time?
I guess I think Mark did a good job giving a summary, but this is intended to be kind of a quick fix to remedy the issue of having developers have an option for continuing to ask for these design adjustments, but having it done in the proper way. So going to the Board of Adjustment. Right now, the standard says that staff may, even subject to all those findings, may grant the design adjustment. So the other change for this would be that be the same standard, but the board shall grant. That word will also be changed if the applicant presents findings or information as to each one of those findings. It just adds in the due process requirement when there's subjective standards. And again, this is a quick fix. It's not, this probably will come back to you in the future. Staff's already started, I think Ken could talk, they've already started looking at whether there can be some objective criteria or if there's a long-term quasi-judicial process or combination of the two. That will ultimately be up to City Council to decide, but right now, staff is not accepting any more applications for these, which for the development community, they need to have an avenue, was what we've heard from them. So this will give them that opportunity in the interim. So.
Thank you. Okay, we have questions.
Just to clarify, this is for street design adjustments, is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Another question, do we have a sense of the time frame it might take to get to the next step?
Well, I think folks are still digesting my 29-page analysis of the issue. But I think we have a, that's the truth, by the way.
I believe it.
But, you know, we need to put a working group together to kind of, using that as a point of departure, develop some actual text language, which is a not insignificant task, but we are committed to trying to do it as quickly as possible. So I'm hopeful that we'll have something to look at this summer. There'll be a longer term and more meaningful fix for this. Right.
Okay. So yes, ma'am.
So, Mr. Chair, if there are no questions, I'm ready to make a motion.
I was just going to add one question. We invite public comment on this?
Oh, good
Yeah.
idea.
I was thinking that would be appropriate.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in support of this concept? Anyone wish to speak in opposition? Okay, now, Ms. Jeffries.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to make a recommendation of approval for this because I believe it's in the interest of the city to get something in place, at least temporarily, so that we can move forward with assessing these street design changes. So it's in the public interest to do that.
And consistent with the comp plan policies in the staff report.
And it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and the staff report. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second.
Second.
We have a second, Ms. Hicks. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, we, thank you. Very, very important issue. Thank you, Mr. Holland, for bringing that to us, and Ms. Hoffman for helping us understand it. Now, this next one, Mr. Crane, is for you.
That's correct. And if it pleases the commission, I'll just stay seated because I don't have a formal presentation. This might be one of the easiest text changes you've ever seen. It's not complicated and not entirely thick, so very targeted change to the code. So we have a reference in the code today to the development fee guide. The city is in the process of assembling one fee schedule, the City of Raleigh fee schedule. It is our hope that that fee schedule is adopted in conjunction with the budget this year. So this text change would simply change the name of the reference in the UDO from Development Fee Guide to City of Raleigh Fee Schedule in a few targeted locations. That is the extent of the change. There is no regulatory impact on this whatsoever. It just changes the name of the external document. Happy to answer any questions.
City Council would approve this presumably after they've approved it.
So that's something that we've, so City Planning has been working in conjunction with Budget Management Services and the Attorney's Office on this, and we're talking about the timing of this text change along with the adoption of the budget. There also is a need to change the city code, which y'all normally don't see changes to the city code, and that will be presented to the City Council next week. So I agree with you, the adoption or the sequencing of the adoption of these ordinances would be critical.
Any other questions?
I'm going to move approval because this seems to be consistent with, I don't know, the comprehensive plan. We need to get the language right, so, and the staff report. So I'll move approval.
A motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. All right. Now, let's move along. Approval of minutes. We held the 4/9/19 commission meeting minutes because there were some corrections to be made.
Right, we did, and I was wrong. So what I was remembering was from a previous meeting. So what I thought was missing from 4/9 was not missing from 4/9. So I apologize for that.
So, we'll have a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from
Motion to approve.
April 9th.
Second?
Second.
A motion to approve and a second to approve 4/9/19 commission meeting minutes. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now the 4/23/19 commission meeting minutes.
I did have an addition that I've emailed to, sorry to Jay. Yeah, that I believe that I expressed that I wanted to see some world-class architecture, something comparable to Chicago, Singapore, or other big cities, if they're granted this kind of height. So, and I sent you that language.
That was Z1.
Yeah, that was Z3/19. That was, yeah, that was Harrington and Peace. It was the 40-story building.
Okay.
With that addition, I move approval.
Motion to approve in a second with that addition. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And the committee of the whole meeting minutes from 4/25.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion to approve in a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And then lastly, the 4/30/19 Planning Commission Special Session Meeting minutes.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion to approve in a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. In terms of other business, I'll just point out Michelle is missing today because her father died recently, and she has gone to St. Louis to help settle things. And he had been ill for a while, so this was not a surprise. Loss nonetheless, so if you have an opportunity to express your consideration to her, I'm sure it would be appreciated. On a different note, yeah, I do tend to bug you people about using the microphones, only for two reasons. One, if you've ever sat in the audience, acoustics are terrible in here, and it really helps to people to hear when we actually speak into the microphone. And two, these sessions are recorded, so for the interest, if you care about the public view, and I know you all do, it really helps them. So this is not a vanity thing. It's really about helping be more clear in the language at the table. Sometimes when we're talking to Ken, he's right there. We don't need the mic, and yet the public is still with us. So just be a little more conscious about the microphones. Report from the members. Anyone?
Mr. Chair, I wanted to run two things by us here. Summer vacations are starting to happen, and
what are those?
I think the City Council is going to be having a break. I have a summer vacation scheduled, so I think we ought to start thinking about when we want to take our break. I know that I spoke to Travis before we started, and he said typically we might come back mid-August to start with the text change committee, but I will not be back on that date. So anyway, just wanted to put a bug in everybody's ear to start thinking about that, and see if planning can come back to us and give us some ideas about dates.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good point. Another point of interest here, with the new year, July being the new year, we elect officers at that time. So we need to be, and I have been talking with some people about that. We need to get that straightened out very shortly. And we also tend to also, with the new chair, look at committee appointments. So that'll be something that will be taking place at that time. I've spoken with CJ about committee appointments. He's interested in seeing how the next leadership team is in place, and then figure out those committees in. So you all might think about your own committee interest to help move that and make it a very seamless transition once we get past July 1.
Mr. Chair, that is something I also want to speak to about.
Please do.
The need for a new chair for the Planning Commission, and it seems that we're having difficulty finding people who are interested in running for chair. I would be interested, except for there's an expectation for the chair to appear before the City Council during the day, and that's problematic for me, and I believe that might be problematic for some other folks on this committee. And I wanted to see if staff could look at some discussion with the City Council, if there could be some adjustment to that expectation, because it might make it more available or more of a possibility for people on the Planning Commission if they didn't have to appear before City Council at 1 o'clock twice a month. I know that is a showstopper for me, so.
Yeah, okay. I think you have expressed that well, and I'm sure staff will look at that.
Well, so staff could broach with the council staff, discussion with members. As I think you're aware, many times you show up, report, and since we kind of are doing nothing more than scheduling the public hearings for the items that you're reporting out, and staff typically has a little summary slide, which I'll give. The chair may not say anything at all, and may only be called upon if there's a question about why the commission voted one way or the other. So, but it has been customary for the chair to show up and represent the commission at those meetings. We could broach the topic and see if the council would be willing to consider that and report back to you if that's what you would like us to do.
Can we designate somebody to go? I'm not going to be a candidate for chair myself, but I'd be happy to go to the council meetings.
Well, in the past,
I can go.
In the absence of the chair, usually the vice chair goes. If it gets beyond that person, I'm sure someone could be designated to be that,
well, if the vice chair,
person.
Yeah, right.
So
if the vice chair can do it, good, do it.
So it could be that thing where, but if we know a person is interested in a chair but who will never be available, then that puts an expectation on the vice chair to always be available. So there may be some internal strategies for that.
I'm suggesting, Rob, that if the vice chair is available,
we might have to revisit our bylaws in terms of, I don't know that we would have to. We might want to look at that just to see if our language allows for that succession plan for representing us at the council. The Speaker of the House at some point takes responsibility.
Is it such that council city council will generally know when they would like to hear from the commission, or is it during the meeting that would the commission come on down here on demand?
I personally never know when there'll be a question for the chair. And I think, it's just it may occur to the council member in the moment that they wanted to ask something about it. I think it's just been customary for the chair or vice chair to be there to represent the body in the way that staff can't really represent the body, but we can certainly represent. We can report on the vote.
Is this sentiment?
And we have, because these questions have come up, if it's not a unanimous vote, much of the time we will explain the dissenting vote in the agenda item, or be at least prepared to explain at the time. I would say that the vast majority of questions that come from council are of that nature. Why did two people vote against this?
My point was that perhaps we can get a little additional runway on those issues. That would help out.
Some are obvious, but then there's always a curveball. Yeah, you never know when they're going to throw a curve.
It was just a thought.
That's a thought. Ms. Hoffman, were you about to say something?
This kind of applies more to meetings, but so the vice chair serves as the chair in the absence of the chair. If the vice chair is absent or unable to serve, the body shall temporarily elect a chairperson.
Okay.
But that's more for way meetings run. I don't know if you have to do something that formal to send somebody.
Right. Conceivably, Mr. Gary, your suggestion is that if at the table here, if I say, look, I can't be there next week, and he says, well, I'm not going to be here, we could agree then to have someone represent us. Again, it's a cameo most of the time, but you need to be prepared when someone says, this is in my district, and I want to know why you voted against it, or whatever the answer is. So it's a matter of being able to speak on behalf of the commission, not a personal expression, but the commissioners felt. Anyway, you all understand that. So we will continue to ponder this. Ms. Jeffries, you've raised a legitimate question, and we will figure out, we want to do the right thing here. Other member comments?
Well, I just want to apologize for messing up the special meeting last week on the comp plan update, for which I was very well prepared, except I didn't know what time the meeting was. So.
Well, you weren't alone. We were alone, but you weren't alone. So it was just one of those things. It was one of those things. Well, Tika and I had a great conversation, and Travis got to go have lunch. So it worked out really well, actually. It worked out really well. And again, to that regard, we do have more special meetings coming up, and we've set them into the future. Things change, but if you know something comes up that now, yes, I said I could attend, but I can't, the sooner you let us know that, so we don't, the better, so we can accommodate. We got to have a quorum. We can't even open the meeting in the absence of one.
So our next special meeting is the 30th of May, as I
May
recall.
30th.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Is there any?
Yes, ma'am.
What time?
We are planning to bring forward on your committee of the whole agenda. You're going to meet to discuss that Pollock Place zoning case, but we're going to bring forward the land use transportation follow-up for discussion at that meeting, since you only have one item on your agenda. And then on the 28th, we are expecting a lighter agenda than we have had today or at the previous meeting, and are planning to bring forward one of the topics. I think it's the economic
Housing and economic development.
housing,
maybe?
the prosperity,
Okay.
economic prosperity. And then that would have, in theory, leave us with a little bit lighter agenda for the 30th.
Okay,
So
thank you.
just forecasting that for you.
Great.
So could you forecast that in email for us so that we're clear about what we should be preparing for more than 2 days in advance?
Sure.
I'd appreciate it. So
Thank
it
you.
takes some time to read.
No, it's good to know that. And yeah, it's good, because if we get to the end of the month and we're just now we've lost a lot of time. So moving along is helpful. Okay, now report from the planning director.
So, report from the last council meeting. There were 5 items which were approved. We had a long public hearing that night. Z219 Dixon Drive, Z1118 on Garner Road, Z3018 on Pool Road, CP718, the land use map change on Corporate Center Drive, and the 24-month waiver period for Z718 on South New Hope Road. That's a portion of the Old Town property, was approved. So that rezoning for the balance of that former planned development can come in. without waiting for 2 years. There were 2 items referred to the Growth and Natural Resources Committee, Z319 Harrington and Peace, that's the 40-story rezoning, and then C2518 on Lead Mine Road. TC5B18 was referred back to the Economic Development and Innovation Committee. CP2A 19-2030 Comprehensive Plan Update, the first of your finalized reviews, was scheduled for public hearing on June 4th. So, barring no issues, that portion of the amendment may be adopted at that time, or held for further work. Z819 Cabarrus Street was scheduled for public hearing on July 2nd. The TC 618, the Cottage Court text change, was granted a 90-day extension for you to continue your review. And TC 119 Homestays was deferred for 2 weeks and will be heard at the next council meeting on May 21st.
Okay, thank you. Upcoming meetings, text change next Tuesday. Discuss Cottage Court. And and strategic plan is not meeting this month. The Transportation Committee looks like it's next meeting in June, and we'll meet again in 2 weeks. Anything else? Then we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Ready? Detail. Halt. Ready? Face. Post. Coast. Reset. Halt. Order. Halt. Ready? Face. Detail. Post.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everybody, you may be seated. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ronnie Mazzell, and I'm the Division Chief of Training for the Raleigh Fire Department. On behalf of Chief McGrath and the entire command staff, we want to welcome each and every one of you tonight to the Raleigh Fire Department's 2019 Spring Promotional Ceremony. Tonight, on this very special occasion, we will recognize the promotional achievements